everything that brings you joy also brings you equal amounts of sadness. If you kind of pull back from that. So let's say you're dating someone, they bring you joy, but then when you break up, it brings you sadness. You get a new car, but maybe you get in a car accident. Like, how long does that happiness last? So then it's like the absence of it being a new car that makes you sad or complacent or want a new car. So all of these external things that we think will bring us joy, because they do bring us joy, equally will eventually bring us sadness in one way, shape, or form.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about the totality of it. Coming in so happy and then exiting potentially sad. I guess it's like life also. Born and death, night and dark. There is so much balance, the yin and the yang of it all. To think that we don't have one without the other is crazy. I mean, you can't have happiness without sadness. If you don't know happy, then you don't know sad.
It's these points where you're like, if you're on a grind to get to a place, that it's funny when people look back and they're like, those were the best times. When you're in it, you're like, this sucks. But that gives you the polar of, oh, wow, I do know it feels good because now I've made it and I'm out of the yuck. But the big thing is you can't have a thing until you're able to vibrate on the frequency of having it already. You can, like, I pushed through a lot of, especially when I was in corporate America and had, made a lot of money, but I was always pretty miserable. And so it was so hard for me to slog it to the top, not in terms of my ability to get there, but my mental state was just shit the whole time because it was very unfulfilling for me. And I realized that once I got there, because I still had the same limiting beliefs, I was still a low vibration person essentially, then I was just afraid. So I no longer needed the thing. I just moved into fear of losing the thing.
You hear about people that are really successful and they're still miserable. It's because you haven't fixed what the actual problem is. You thought you were looking outside of yourself for external validation and whatever the thing is. Let's say I want to start a successful business. Start a successful business, become a millionaire, and then you're still miserable. It's because you didn't deal with whatever the problem is. You were chasing something else, looking for that to validate, increase your emotional frequency. And then when you realize it doesn't, it's still you looking back at you. Have you ever heard of that saying?
Dude, and it's literally, you nailed it. So the fear is the place of needing. So I'm like, okay, well, I need this amount of money and then I'll finally be able to feel comfortable and safe and happy. And then when I got the amount of money, the fear was still there. But then instead of saying I need the money to be happy, was I need to not lose the money to be happy. So I literally just stayed in this dump fear state for so long. And what's really interesting is desire is only slightly higher than that, but it's on the line of moving towards what I would call neutrality, which is where you're like, whatever. You're not at what I like to call good with or without it. You're just not negatively charged by the desire that you once had. It's baseline. Then you move into acceptance, which is 350 hertz. And that's where you go, you know what? I'm good either way. You're not like super stoked, but you're in a much higher vibration where you can take it or leave it.
I would say most people don't even know necessarily what baseline is. We also have to consider external factors. I heard a podcast this morning, actually, and in the podcast, they were talking about different generations and how an older generation may say, the new generation, they don't do things right. They don't do things like this, that, the other, which is...
I say shit like that all the time, and okay. I'm like, I'm my parents now.
Yeah, boomer. But what are the external forces around it? Because our parents' generation didn't have consumerism like we do. They didn't have a million items on Amazon for $20, and you can have them all in 4 hours or less. And they didn't have social media. They didn't have a lot of things, right? So what are the external factors around this that are contributing to the emotions of where you're at, and why can't you figure out what baseline is? There could be a million answers to this question, but I just mean to say that because of this idea of baseline and people not knowing what baseline is, I don't think they actually know where they fit in terms of their attitude and their emotional frequency.
Yeah, they might. Like, people might not even realize that they're vibrating at a low frequency. Once I started to get into this stuff, there are areas where I'm neutral. There are areas where I'm acceptance, gratitude a few, but I'm looking overall and I'm like, oh, you're like low on the range, homie.